The sharp crack of a gavel cut through the room. Not in a courtroom. Not during a trial, but in the middle of a congressional hearing, broadcast live, watched by reporters and witnessed by a row of survivors, sitting only a few feet away. A sitting congressman was speaking. His voice had grown louder. His question was about one of the most explosive scandals in modern American politics. Then, suddenly, cracked out, the gavel dropped. His microphone went silent. The interruption lasted only seconds, but what happened in that moment, and what led up to it, reveals a much bigger story unfolding between the Department of Justice, the federal courts, and Congress itself. Because this wasn't just about one lawmaker running out of time, it was about power, accountability, and a conflict that has been building inside Washington for months. And at the center of it all was Pam Bondi. On February 11, 2026, the Attorney General appeared before the United States House Judiciary Committee for a Department of Justice oversight hearing. In theory, these hearings are routine. Every year the Attorney General sits before lawmakers, delivers an opening statement, and answers questions about the department's work. Members of Congress ask about crime rates, enforcement priorities, and legal policy. Usually the atmosphere is formal but predictable. This one was different from the start. Reporters packed the room earlier than usual. Staffers moved quickly between the rows of seats. Cameras were positioned to capture every angle of the witness table. And directly behind the Attorney General sat several women whose presence alone changed the tone of the entire hearing. They were survivors, connected to the investigation surrounding Jeffrey Epstein. Their quiet presence turned what might have been a routine oversight session into something far more emotionally charged. But the tension in the room wasn't just about Epstein. It was also about the growing conflict between the Department of Justice and the federal courts. Since Bondi took office in February 2025, the DOJ had faced an extraordinary wave of litigation. According to congressional briefings, the department had been sued more than 600 times over various policy decisions. Federal judges reviewing those cases had issued rulings that were unusually blunt in tone. In several decisions, judges used phrases like inexplicably, misleading, patently, incredible, and so disingenuous that the court cannot accept it. Language like that is rare in federal court opinions. Judges are typically cautious with their words. When they speak that sharply, it signals something deeper than an ordinary legal disagreement. It suggests institutional tension, and that tension followed Bondi into the hearing room. When the session began, Bondi appeared composed. She adjusted her microphone, thanked the committee for the opportunity to testify, and launched into an opening statement that had clearly been prepared with great care. Her tone was confident, her delivery polished. She emphasized what she described as significant successes by the Department of Justice. According to her remarks, the country had experienced a 21% decline in murder rates, a 43% drop in carjackings, and major drug enforcement victories. She highlighted the seizure of 47 million fentanyl pills during 2025, describing it as one of the largest drug enforcement efforts in modern history. Bondi also pointed to the administration's record at the United States, where she said government lawyers had successfully defended key policies. The message was clear. Under her leadership, she argued, the Department of Justice was restoring its core mission. She framed that mission as reversing what she called years of political weaponization inside the justice system. But as the statement continued, observers noticed something else. Bondi never turned around. She never acknowledged the women sitting directly behind her. The Epstein survivors remained silent throughout the opening remarks. Then Bondi shifted to another topic, one that immediately raised the temperature in the room: the federal courts. Bondi told lawmakers that the administration had been facing what she described as a flood of bad faith, temporary restraining orders from liberal activist judges across this country. She called the pattern unprecedented judicial activism, and she argued that many of the rulings were an unlawful attack on executive authority. For a sitting attorney general to publicly characterize federal court orders that way is highly unusual. Normally, Justice Department leaders defend their legal arguments in court filings, not in political hearings, but Bondi's comments made it clear that the conflict with the judiciary was no longer confined to legal brief study, had moved into the political arena. And that set the stage for what came next. When questioning began, members of Congress had 5 minutes each. Some focused on crime statistics. Others asked about immigration enforcement, drug trafficking, or civil rights cases. But eventually the discussion turned to the issue that many observers had been waiting for: the Epstein files. When his turn arrived, Hank Johnson leaned forward and began asking questions about the Justice Department's handling of documents connected to Epstein's network. The controversy surrounding those documents had been building for weeks. Earlier releases had shown that the DOJ had redacted the names of several high-profile individuals connected to Epstein, but in some cases, the names of victims had appeared unredacted. That revelation sparked outrage among advocacy groups and legal experts. Critics argued that protecting powerful individuals while exposing victims represented a serious ethical failure. Johnson began walking through the issue carefully. He referenced questions raised earlier in the hearing by Pramila Johnson, who had asked Bondi to directly address the survivors in the room. Johnson repeated the request. His voice became more forceful as he spoke. He described the consequences of releasing documents that exposed victims. He emphasized the importance of accountability from the nation's top law enforcement official. Then he made a simple request. He asked Bondi to turn around to look at the survivors sitting behind her and to apologize. The room grew quiet. Johnson continued speaking, building toward the moment. But before he could finish, crack, the gavel came down. The sound echoed across the chamber. Johnson stopped mid-sentence. The microphone cut off, and for a moment, confusion rippled through the room. But the gavel did not belong to a judge. This was not a courtroom. The gavel belonged to Jim Jordan, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. His role was to enforce the 5-minute time limit for questioning. According to committee rules, Johnson's time had expired. From a procedural standpoint, the interruption was routine. Congressional hearings operate on strict time limits. Chairs frequently use the gavel to move proceedings along. But context matters, and the timing of this particular interruption made it look very different. Johnson had been speaking about Epstein victims. He had just asked the Attorney General to face them. And at that exact moment, the gavel stopped him. Within hours, the clip began circulating across social media. Many viewers saw it as symbolic. To some, it looked like a lawmaker being silenced while demanding accountability. To others, it was simply the enforcement of standard rules. But either way, the image was powerful. A gavel dropping just as the issue of victims and responsibility reached its peak. And that image spread quickly online. But the gavel moment was only part of the story. The larger conflict surrounding Bondi's leadership of the Justice Department continued unfolding beyond the hearing room that same evening. During a television interview, Bondi escalated her criticism of the judiciary even further. She began naming individual federal judges who had ruled against the administration, and she suggested that judges demonstrating political bias should be removed from the bench. The comments immediately drew concern from legal scholars across the political spectrum. The independence of the judiciary is a foundational principle of the American constitutional system. Judges are expected to rule on cases without fear of political retaliation. When an attorney general publicly calls for their removal, critics argue it risks undermining that principle. Meanwhile, legal battles involving the DOJ continued in federal courts around the country. In New Jersey, a federal judge ruled that Bondi's appointment of Alina Habba as interim U.S. attorney was unlawful. When the department attempted to divide the role among multiple lawyers to work around that decision, the judge called the arrangement a rhetorical smokescreen. He warned that the situation could place thousands of criminal prosecutions at risk if the appointments were found invalid. In Minnesota, another federal judge expressed concern after the attorney general posted arrest photographs of protesters on social media. Before their cases had been resolved, the judge described the move as deeply troubling, noting that the individuals were still legally presumed innocent. Taken together, these cases revealed a pattern. The Justice Department believed the courts were blocking the administration's agenda. The courts believed they were simply enforcing the law, and the tension between those two institutions was growing more visible with each new ruling. Lost in much of the political debate were the women who had quietly attended the hearing. Their presence was not symbolic. They were there because the Epstein investigation continues to raise unresolved questions about how victims were treated by the justice system. The controversy surrounding the document releases intensified those concerns. Critics argued that the government had taken extraordinary steps to shield powerful individuals connected to Epstein's network. At the same time, the accidental exposure of victims' identities suggested serious failures in the handling of sensitive information. For survivors of abuse, the issue was deeply personal. Many had spent years fighting to be heard, and in that hearing room, They waited for recognition from the nation's top law enforcement official. The apology requested by lawmakers never came. Bondi did not turn around. When people watch the viral clip of the gavel dropping, it's easy to see it as a dramatic moment, but in reality, it represents something much larger. It represents the friction between three powerful institutions: Congress, the Department of Justice, and the federal judiciary. Each of them has a role in the constitutional system. Congress oversees the executive branch. The Justice Department enforces federal law, and the courts interpret the Constitution. Normally, those roles operate in balance. But when disagreements become public and personal, the system begins to strain. That's what many observers saw during this hearing. An attorney general accusing judges of bad faith, judges accusing government lawyers of misleading the courts, lawmakers demanding accountability, and victims waiting for acknowledgement. The gavel that stopped Congressman Johnson was procedural, but in that moment, it echoed inside a room already filled with tension. In the end, the most important question raised by the hearing wasn't about the gavel itself, it was about accountability. Who has the authority to hold powerful officials responsible when controversies emerge? Is it Congress through oversight hearings? Is it the courts through legal rulings? Or is it ultimately the public, watching events unfold and deciding what they believe? Those questions remain unresolved. And as the conflict between the Department of Justice and the judiciary continues to evolve, the answers may shape the direction of American law and politics for years to come. Because sometimes, a single moment, a single sound, can capture the tension of an entire system. In this case, that sound was the sharp crack of a gavel, and the debate it triggered is far from over.